Hi everyone, Stepan here. It's Friday, so we are going to continue the series on Vladimir Kramnik. We are moving on to age 11, so we had a look at 4 games when he was 10, which were remarkable, and this one is even better. I mean, to see how he humiliated his opponent and how helpless his opponent was sort of sad, and I wanted some counterplay, I wanted some chances for Mr. Zaitsev, but nothing happened. Let me just say that this is not the Igor Zaitsev that became GM later, nor is it the GM that the Zaitsev variation got named after. It's some random unknown Zaitsev who played in the team tournament in 1986. I don't know which town this game was played in though. Okay, so Kramnik had the black pieces. It's another very instructive Sicilian defense. So for those of you who play the E6 Sicilian, these transpositions are going to be interesting. I'm not going to be spending too much time on the theory, because someone said that I spend too much time on theory and that's a bit dry, so I'm going to try to avoid that. But this is basically going to be a Paulsen/Kahn Sicilian that transposes into a Scheveningen center. So after d4, cd4, knight d4, we have knight c6, the Paulsen Sicilian, and now after knight c3 you could play a6 or queen c7, which is the normal Paulsen style. You could play the 4 knights classical sort of Sicilian, or you could play d6, which Kramnik played, which is now a Scheveningen small center. And now there are a couple of ways to play this position. Usually black is not going to be setting up a hedgehog, but he can. In some main lines it's still usual to play a6 and queen c7, but let's not spend too much time on that. Bishop e3, which is the main move, knight to f6, which again is a normal developing move, bishop e2, and the idea for white here is to try and attack the center, and usually there's going to be a trade of pawns, which is going to leave the e4 pawn isolated for white and the d6 pawn isolated for black, and it's going to happen with white playing f4 and black playing f5, and eventually black taking ef4 and bishop f4. And usually after f4 white is going to play bishop f3, and black is going to have problems on the long diagonal, because as we know in many Sicilians black wants to play a6, b5, bishop b7. Here that's not advisable, but bishop b7 before that, both sides castle, white plays f4. This is still very theoretical, still about, I would say, 2000 games played from this position. e5 is the main move. You could play bishop d7, you could play a6, you could play queen c7, you could play knight takes d4, you could even play rook e8 or knight d7. There are a ton of moves here. e5 is the main move, and let me just show you this trade. So after e5, knight b3, ef4, bishop f4 is the normal way for this modern Scheveningen to go in the middle game, and this is going to be a thematic pawn structure, which both sides have something to play for. White, of course, has the d5 square, black has the e5 square, but it should be equal. Okay, instead of that, Kramnik plays a6, which is okay, a normal move. Bishop to f3. a6, of course, stops knight b5, but weakens b6, and since this bishop came to f3, it's, well, for the moment the c6 knight will be hanging after b5, but you're not really going to have an easy time. You're not going to have an easy time playing b5 anyway. Okay, queen c7 played. Getting the queen of the d file is useful, attacking on the c file is useful. Also, once you play b5, or if you play b5 or b6 and bishop to b7, your bishop is going to be defended, so a good move. Queen to d2 is sort of strange. Now, I've never seen queen d2 in these positions. It has been played 7 times, which I found out later, but I don't really understand the move. I would much prefer the queen on the e file. Usually in Scheveningen Sicilians, the queen is going to go to e2, getting away from the d file and making, well, defending the e4 pawn, also allowing the queen to jump into h5 if the opportunity arises. Now, normally you want to trade off on c6, and after bc6 you play something like knight a4, trying to provoke some weaknesses, and this is a theoretical line: bishop b7, c4, c5, knight c3, and this should be slightly better for white. But instead queen d2, and now bishop d7 played. I think instead of bishop d7, knight takes d4 could have been played, and after bishop takes d4, just e5, again going for this trade, and after bishop e3 takes, going for this Scheveningen idea. after bishop e6, but bishop d7 is okay, avoiding trades. I don't know the age of his opponent in this game. As I said, Kramnik was 11, so it would be remarkable if an 11-year-old boy tried to avoid exchanges against a stronger opponent, if his opponent was stronger, which I don't know. Okay, knight b3 now played voluntarily, and this is a slow move. Now, in many Sicilians, if you are allowed to expand for free, you should do that. So in this position, I think b5 was just a strong move. Your knight is defended twice. If you manage to play b4, this knight is sort of embarrassed, going back to e2, and more importantly, the c2 pawn is going to be weak forever. It's not going to be easy to defend. So, for example, I don't know, let's give white a stupid move. Rook d1, b4, knight e2, and now we can continue a5, a4. You can play rook ac8 or rook fc8 and simply start putting pressure on c2. So b5 in this position would have been very strong. Instead, Kramnik plays rook b8, and this now, of course, gives white the opportunity to play a good positional move, a4. Now, of course, b5 is not as strong because you open up the a file for the white rook. So, for example, b5 takes. This rook is now very good, and it used to be very bad. Okay, so after a4, there's also a positional threat white has on the next turn. So if black plays a stupid move, for example h6, then white could play the move a5 and simply block in the black queen side, making the move rook a8 to b8 obsolete, making the rook stupid, making b6 a very bad move because the rook would be attacking a6, also giving this knight a great route via a4 into b6, and basically the position would be lost on the queen side. What happens on the king side is yet to be resolved, also allowing bishop b6 immediately, so rook f to d8 would be a blunder. So after a4, Kramnik has to react, and there's basically two moves you could play. One of them is bad positionally, one of them is good. a5 is bad, giving up the b5 square, and knight b5 would be possible immediately. b6 is good, stopping a5. This is something you have to play. And now Kramnik plays a normal hedgehog Scheveningen. Rook f to d8 played, excuse me, not rook a to d8, rook f to d1, excuse me, and rook f to d8 played by Kramnik. Here he had an opportunity to play a really strong move. Since the knight retreated to b3, and since the bishop is on f3, which is unusual for most Sicilians, usually the bishop is controlling this diagonal, the c6 knight could play a maneuver which is fairly uncommon, which you don't see often, and maybe that's why he missed it. And the maneuver is knight a5, knight c4. And knight a5 is very similar to knight e5, which is played in most Maroczy bind type positions, and neither positions, where you play knight c4 to force bishop takes c4, and then you grab the bishop pair, although the bishop is usually on b3 in those cases. But knight c4 is very strong here because the bishop is not controlling c4. So in this position, you basically have to play bishop e2. Otherwise, I'm threatening to grab your dark squared bishop, which is a very strong piece, or I'm threatening to take b2. So you have to play bishop e2, and after knight c4 you take, and queen takes, and now you got rid of his light squared bishop, making bishop c6 very strong, making e4 very strong, especially if black plays e5, fixes this pawn and isolates it, then it's going to be even better. So knight a5 was very strong. Let me just mention that after knight a5, if you take it, then the b file is open, and after something like rook a b1, I could play rook b4, and this should be just lost. I don't see a way to defend. If you play b3, then I play rook fc8, and your knight has to move. After the knight moves, I take on c2, and well, should be winning in the queen side, on the queen side and in the center. But instead of knight a5, Kramnik played rook f d8, and his opponent played queen e2, which makes sense, getting away from the d file, attacking a6. And here again, knight a5 was really strong. If you play queen a6, then I can simply take on b3, or play knight c4 again, attacking b2, attacking the bishop. And if you take on a5, again the same problem with the b2 pawn, and of course with the c3 knight and with the c2 pawn. But after queen e2, Kramnik simply played bishop c8, which defends the pawn. And now queen c4, which I was sort of surprised to see. I mean, it looks nice, it's pinning the knight to the queen, and if I play e5, then you have d5 for the moment, but you could be in trouble. And Kramnik simply plays bishop to b7, defending the knight. which I think is good. And here his opponent plays a weak move. He plays f5 prematurely. And these Scheveningen positions where white has f4, e4, you have to be careful because your f4 pawn could be a weakness, and if a trade happens, then you could just be losing on the king side. So what he should have played is a normal Sicilian jump knight d5 when the queen is on c7. This is a very common theme, especially in Maroczy bind positions against the hedgehog. So just imagine a pawn on c4, a queen on d2, and the rook on c1, and you play knight d5. When that trade happens, then the queen is attacked. So knight d5 worked here. Of course, if you take it, then I'm going to take your knight because it's pinned to the queen. So this would have been very good. I think also knight d4 was possible, offering a trade, but he played f5. And now Kramnik made a mistake. ef5, ef5 was just good. I mean, what's the problem with this? You can immediately attack the f4 pawn. It's not easy to defend it with the bishop because I take it. If you play knight d4, I trade and take on f5. If you don't do anything, then I'm going to defend my knight somehow or move my knight and then play bishop c8 or something similar. I could also just continue with knight e5, attacking the queen, attacking the bishop, and winning on the diagonal. So this was a very weak move, not only because f4 is weak, but because my bishop now became a monster, and positionally, I hope you can see the biggest weakness that the move f5 produced, and that's the e5 square. So this bishop, in conjunction with knight e5, in conjunction with the queen on the c file, and with the fact that this could be opened up, would be extremely good for black. So a trade was really good, and queen d7, simply getting away from this pin and then playing for knight e5. I don't know what the evaluation would be, but I would say black is better. Instead, after f5, Kramnik plays queen d7 and allows fe6, fe6. And now the same thing works, but it's not as strong because this bishop is not open. Of course, you still have the e5 square for the knight, but it's not as useful. Okay, now in this position, white could grab a pawn. He shouldn't grab a pawn. I'll show you one mad variation which I calculated, and that's knight d4. And after knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, white plays d5, black plays, d5. And this is a very strong move because it attacks the queen. So if you take on b6, I take your queen. So let's assume he moves the queen. After queen e2, now d4. And now you could take on f6 attacking my queen, you could take on b6 attacking my queen, but neither works because I have pawn takes f3 and then pawn takes e2. So let's say bishop takes f6, and now first you play bishop c5 check so that you don't lose your bishop for nothing, and let's say king f1 or king h1. Now I take ef3, you have to basically play gf3, because if you take my queen, I take your queen with check. And after you take with your king, I can just grab your rook, and this is a rook up for nothing. Not even a pawn, yeah. So this would have been a very nice variation. Instead, after fe6, I mean, I'm not saying white should have calculated all of that. There were 20 variations in the line I just showed you. Instead, he took on b6, which simply doesn't work. This tempo is completely unimportant. This pawn doesn't have anything to do with the game. In fact, it helps black control the b file and eventually grab the b2 pawn. And the simple response is just very strong. Knight e5, attacking the bishop, attacking the queen. The queen has to defend, so queen e2. And in this position, there was, I think, a very strong move. What Kramnik played was also really good. I'd like you to pause the video now and try to find two ways to continue this position. One way is sort of cashing out immediately, and the other one is preparing your assault for one more move. So I think both work. Okay, so Kramnik played rook f8. The idea behind rook f8 is knight takes f3, and then a discovered attack on the queen with knight takes e4, and in conjunction with this bishop, that's crushing. Okay, what could have been played was knight f3 straight away, and in this position you probably have to take with the g-pawn because you don't want your queen on the f3 square. If you take with the queen, then I can just play bishop takes e4. And if you play knight takes e4, then I play rook takes b6. And again, no material lost yet, but all of my pieces are just perfect. And my rook is great, your b2 pawn is weak, your c2 pawn is weak. If you ever trade on f6, my bishop gets on f6 and you're gonna cry. So this worked. But rook f8 may be stronger if you're playing for no drawing tricks and not allowing any counterplay or simplifications. In this position, I think bishop a7 should have been played, or bishop f2 or bishop e3, getting the bishop out of harm's way, because with this bishop being loose on b6, there are numerous tactics that work. So let's say bishop a7 gaining a tempo, and now black again has this very strong knight takes f3, and again, if you play queen takes f3, now knight takes e4 works even better. Let's say queen g4, and now just knight takes c3. And if you take on b8, I take on d1. So let's say bc3, and now I simply play rook c8. And again, if you count the material is equal. But black has the bishop pair. Black has a much better pawn structure. Black has no weaknesses. Black has a safer king. So this even with best play by black after rook f8, even if he did move the bishop away, I think it would have been, by white, excuse me, it would have been better for black. Instead he played a5, and a5 solidifies the bishop, which is okay. Sort of sorts out the issue of the bishop. But now again the same thing works. Knight takes f3, and Kramnik unfortunately didn't play that. He played a crazy move, but knight takes f3 was really strong. Again, gf3. If you play gf3, then knight h5, knight f4 is strong. And if queen f3, then of course knight takes e4. And again, the same problems happen, but you're not attacking my rook. So now once you move your queen, I take on c3, etc. Okay, instead of that, Kramnik went completely crazy and he played g5, which I understand threatens to trap the bishop, fine. So white plays h3, but I'm not sure the inclusion of the move g5 is helpful. So he took on f3 now, and after g takes f3, of course, not allowing queen takes f3, knight e4, he now plays e5, locking down this structure, and I think he wanted to play positionally in a position which is completely tactical, and I think that was a mistake. And I don't think the pawn on g5 helps his position. But okay, e5 played, queen g2 played, attacking g5, which cannot be taken. If queen takes g5, then simply rook h8, and after something like king h2, I can just take knight takes e4, attacking your queen, and then I take on f3, then I take everything. So after queen e6, of course, Mr. Zaitsev didn't take the pawn. He played knight e2, and preparing to either play knight g3 to cover himself up, or maybe to challenge these two squares, but I don't know how. Okay, and now Kramnik, instead of playing knight h5, which is I think a normal continuation, let's say rook d2 and knight f4, and takes, oh, okay. Yeah, okay, not here, but maybe not knight f4 straight away. Maybe preparing it some more with king h8 and then knight f4. So instead of going for knight h5, which I thought was obvious after e5 and g5, he now plays d5, which is, for me at least, the most instructive move in the game. So when I have an advantage of any sort, I try to keep it as it is, and I try to not lose it. And I don't want to risk it, so I don't think of ways to improve my position further. Or I do, but I don't do it efficiently because I'm scared. When I have something, I'm afraid of losing it. The move d5 is the complete opposite of what I would be thinking of in this position. Of course, it gets rid of the backwards pawn, so positionally that's good. But strategically, it's incredible. Why? Because it breaks open this diagonal and simply makes the bishop stronger. So d5 is definitely the best move in the position. Maybe the engine would disagree, but it makes perfect sense strategically. White plays knight g3, looking at f5, great. Rook bc8 played, attacking c2, knight f5. The knight looks nice, but doesn't really do much. King h8. And now knight takes e7. I mean, I think the knight was better than the bishop, but okay. Queen takes e7, rook e1 played, and now d takes e4. And after f takes e4, here Kramnik had a chance to win the position straight away. I mean, it's lost for white. It has been much worse for white for a while, but after d5 it's almost impossible to defend, and from here on the position gets so sad that if you are a very empathic person, just don't watch. I just felt bad for the guy. So Kramnik played rook c4, which is okay. He could have played g4, just winning on the spot, and if you advance the pawn, then I have stuff like knight h5, knight f4, and this pawn is going forward. Excuse me. If you take by any chance, then I just play rook g8, and after something like king h1, rook takes g4, and this is actually a mate in a couple of moves. Knight takes e4, and yeah, you can see what's going on. So after g4, there would have been no good defense. After h4, knight h5, and of course g3 and knight f4, and eventually I'm just going to crush you. And of course queen takes h4. So g4 would have been completely winning, but rook c4 is okay. Knight d2 attacks the rook, loses the c2 pawn. Rook ac1 challenges the rook, and now pause the video and find a very nice tactical move. I mean, really nice. Okay, so Kramnik played bishop takes e4. Now, no response for white is good. If you play rook takes e4, then I play rook takes c1 check. If you play knight takes e4, then I play rook takes g2 check. So let me put that on the board. So knight takes, rook takes queen check. We don't have to look at that. If rook takes, which seems sensible, then rook takes rook check, and again you lose. If you play queen takes e4, which is probably the best attempt out of the three, then you don't even have to take the queen immediately. You can just take on c1 first, and if he moves the queen, you take. But okay, if you want to play it safely, you can just take the queen, and after rook takes c2, you take, and it's completely crushing. So after bishop takes e4, there was no good response. You have to simply move the queen, queen to e2, and now he could have played rook takes b2. I don't think there was anything wrong with rook takes pawn. I don't see the problem with that. Maybe bishop e3 or queen e3 in this position, trying to unpin. Instead, after queen e2, he played rook fc8, which increases the pressure, gives white the chance to trade stuff off. So if rook c2, then bishop e3 would have been sort of solid. He traded off some material, g5 is weak, and I'm not sure how black proceeds. So after rook f to c8, I think white should have traded stuff off and tried to go for some sort of equality. Instead, he played rook cd1, declining trades in a position where his king is completely naked. White has a bishop on e4, black has a bishop on e4, black has a knight coming to h5, double rooks on the c file. I just don't understand rook cd1. That's completely suicidal. And now Kramnik plays g4, just breaking everything open, and after h4, bishop f3 wins material. I mean, if he didn't play h4, then there would have been other ways to win. Queen a6, bishop takes rook, rook takes rook, and now queen d7 pins the knight to the rook, of course, and well, queen e2 defends, but now queen d5. Again, if you move the knight, I take your queen. Once you take my queen, I take with the knight, so I win a piece. So queen f2 played, at least defending, so now moving the knight would be a trade, but now knight e4, and yeah, if you move the knight, I take your rook. So queen f5 played, going for some tricks, attacking the rook. So if you take the knight with the rook, then I take your c8 rook with check. So rook c1, just offering a trade, king h2, rook g8. This is all just very, very simple. Queen trade happens, or queen trade offered and declined, and in this position, after king f3, queen f8 check, queen f4, rook f1, his opponent resigned. I mean, it wasn't fun after g4 anymore. It actually wasn't fun for the last 10 moves, but after g4 it was just game over. So I think this was a remarkable domination on the board throughout the game. The only mistake I think was sort of serious was that after f5 Kramnik didn't take it. I think after f5, if you take and continue with queen d7, I think the game would have been over much sooner. And this is, I was surprised that he didn't take it. Other than that, it was close to a perfect game. I hope you liked it. I learned the most from the move d5. Let me know what you think about the game. And yeah, any feedback is appreciated. See you tomorrow. Thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.